On the surface, Azkaban seems like a pretty good idea, mainly due to its effectiveness. It's on a far-off, remote island, it has a fortress designed to keep the most dangerous criminals at bay, there are perpetual storms surrounding the island, and there's an army of Dementors working as prison guards. And that's just the physical side of things. Mentally, the prison is an absolute nightmare. The crashing waves and howling winds serve as a natural barrier, isolating the inmate from the world they once terrorized. The Dementors, with their shadowy forms, siphon hope and happiness from every soul they encounter, and those who enter Azkaban often leave something behind. Pieces of their sanity, their will to fight, and sometimes even their humanity. And all of this is just about borderline acceptable if we consider that it's meant to house murderers, dark wizards, and those who have committed unspeakable acts against others. But the major issue here is that Azkaban is one of the only wizarding prisons in Britain. And what this means is that perpetrators of more minor crimes, and in some cases those who have been wrongly convicted, are unjustly sent into this hellhole along with the rest of them. It hardly seems appropriate that someone convicted for, say, theft would endure what is essentially the same punishment as someone who was murdered. This raises a whole plethora of questions about wizarding society as a whole, but the one we're going to start with is, why one gigantic, horrible prison? Why not a network of smaller, more humane facilities that focus on rehabilitation rather than sheer punishment? Today we're going to be diving into all of that and more as we discuss the mess that is the wizarding justice system. Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. What many of you probably didn't know is that when Azkaban was initially discovered by the Ministry of Magic, they decided to leave the island alone. The island, which had one time been the subject of the Dark Wizard Acrisdus' dark arts experiments, was revealed after he died and his concealment charms on the island lifted. Left behind was the fortress, Dementors, and apparently a lot of other stuff as well. In fact, initial surveyors of the island remarked that the least frightening part of it was that it was infested with Dementors, and so the general sentiment was that Azkaban should be left alone entirely. Many in authority thought Azkaban an evil place that was best destroyed. Others were afraid of what might happen to the Dementors infesting the building if they deprived them of their home. The creatures were already strong and impossible to kill. Many feared a horrible revenge if they took away a habitat where they appeared to thrive. The very walls of the building seemed steeped in misery and pain, and the Dementors were determined to cling to it. Experts who had studied buildings built with and around dark magic contended that Azkaban might wreak its own revenge upon anybody attempting to destroy it. The fortress was therefore left abandoned for many years, a home to continually breeding Dementors. However, all of that would change in 1718, when Damocles Rowell was elected as the second ever Minister for Magic. Rowell took over from Ulick Gamp, who had been against the use of Azkaban. But Rowell saw the terrifying island as an opportunity. It occurred to Rowell that the system for imprisoning witches and wizards at that time was no longer going to work, primarily due to concerns surrounding security. The International Statute of Secrecy had been recently introduced, and protecting the secrecy of wizard kind became of utmost importance. And before Azkaban became the spot for imprisoning witches and wizards, there were actually many different locations that someone who broke wizarding law could be locked up. The Ministry of Magic felt that the small wizarding prisons that existed up and down the country in various towns and villages posed a security risk, because attempts by incarcerated witches and wizards to break out often led to undesirable bangs, smells, and light shows. A purpose-built prison, located on some remote Hebridean island, was preferred, and plans had been drawn up when Damocles Rowell became Minister for Magic. The International Statute of Secrecy was introduced in 1692, and Rowell didn't take over until 1718. This meant that for over 2 decades prior to Rowell taking over, the wizarding prison issue had been on their radar. However, Rowell didn't agree with the existing plans to create a new purpose-built prison. Instead, he pushed and pushed to utilize the existing infrastructure at Azkaban. Sadistic by nature, Raoul scrapped the plans for the new prison at once and insisted on using Azkaban. He claimed that the Dementors living there were an advantage. They could be harnessed as guards, saving the ministry time, trouble, and expense. In spite of opposition from many wizards, among them experts on both Dementors and buildings with Azkaban's kind of dark history, Raoul carried out his plan, and soon a steady trickle of prisoners had been placed there. None ever emerged. If they were not mad and dangerous before being placed in Azkaban, they swiftly became so. Raoul continued in his role for a number of years before being ousted, and was eventually succeeded by the third ever Minister for Magic, Perseus Parkinson. But unfortunately, Parkinson was similarly pro-Azkaban. Thus, the prison remained in use. Raoul was succeeded by Perseus Parkinson, who was likewise pro-Azkaban. By the time that Eldritch Diggory took over as Minister for Magic, the prison had been operating for 15 years. There had been no breakouts and no breaches of security. The new prison seemed to be working well. It was only when Diggory went to visit that he realized exactly what conditions inside were like. Prisoners were mostly insane, and a graveyard had been established to accommodate those that died of despair. By the time Eldritch Diggory, the only minister who may have actually opposed the use of Azkaban, took over, it was too late, as Azkaban had proven itself a competent holding facility. By this time, the prison had successfully operated for 15 years. There were fewer wizarding breakouts, in fact there were none, and the Dementors of Azkaban were accounted for. And to many, including multiple iterations of the wizarding government, this was enough to keep using the prison. However, the biggest oversight was that witches and wizards were being sent to an environment akin to the depths of hell for seemingly all manners of crimes, and nobody seemed to care so long as the streets were rid of criminals, and the Dementors were kept busy. Which raises unsettling questions like, at what cost do we keep society safe, and how do we reconcile justice with the very real human suffering that comes from such a place? The psychological toll on prisoners in Azkaban, particularly those wrongfully convicted, raises some pretty serious ethical considerations. Think about it. Due to the large numbers of Dementors in the fortress, inmates are subjected to a relentless drain of hope and happiness, forced to relive their worst memories and feelings of despair. Get too near a Dementor and every good feeling, every happy memory will be sucked out of you. If it can, the Dementor will feed on you long enough to reduce you to something like itself, soulless and evil. You'll be left with nothing but the worst experiences of your life. And all of this occurs while they're trapped within the dark, cold walls of Azkaban, deprived of any human contact or sensory stimulation. And for those wrongfully convicted, the psychological effects are likely even more devastating. Innocent individuals endure the same horrors as the guilty, but with the addition of feelings of betrayal and despair. The extreme conditions of Azkaban not only punish the body, but also devastate the mind, raising serious questions about the use of such a facility in the name of so-called justice. But the Ministry of Magic aren't stupid, at least not all of them anyway. They know that all of this is happening, they just turn a blind eye. And why is that? Because of fear, of course. People do stupid, irrational, and even dangerous things out of fear. Case in point, Cornelius Fudge denying the resurgence of Voldemort despite indisputable evidence. By denying Voldemort's resurgence, Cornelius Fudge not only failed to acknowledge a grave threat, but also placed the entire wizarding world in a highly compromised and unprepared position. But where in the case of Azkaban does all of the fear come from? Why, the Dementors, of course. Unkillable dark spirits that seem to thrive, and more importantly stay put, in the conditions that the Ministry had created for them. Others were afraid of what might happen to the Dementors infesting the building if they deprived them of their home. The creatures were already strong and impossible to kill. Many feared a horrible revenge if they took away a habitat where they appeared to thrive. The use of Azkaban may not have been perpetuated by further ministers out of a desire to maintain an effective prison, but instead out of a fear of what would happen to the Dementors if sending prisoners to Azkaban halted. From the time they sent the first prisoner there, they set a precedent, and if the Ministry were to suddenly take away all of these souls, perhaps the Dementors would depart their island and come straight for the wizarding mainland. They had unwittingly created a food supply. And so, driven by fear, the Ministry established a policy of continually admitting prisoners as sacrificial lambs to appease the dark guardians of their prison, an arrangement reminiscent of sacrifices made to malevolent deities. From the moment you committed any sort of wizarding crime, you would become one of these sacrifices, with no regard for your humanity or possibility of redemption. Ultimately, the ministry created a prison system that underscores moral integrity in favor of control and public safety, leaving lasting scars on both the wrongfully imprisoned and the society that condones such practices. Many of the early ministers for magic were completely fine with turning a blind eye and maintaining this arrangement. However, when Eldritch Diggory took over from Perseus Parkinson, he was the first to question the use of Dementors as prison guards. Back in London, Diggory established a committee to explore alternatives to Azkaban, or at least to remove the Dementors as guards. Experts explained to him that the only reason the Dementors were mostly confined to the island was that they were being provided with a constant supply of souls on which to feed. If deprived of prisoners, they were likely to abandon the prison and head for the mainland. This advice notwithstanding, Diggory had been so horrified by what he had seen inside Azkaban that he pressed the committee to find alternatives. Before they could reach any decision, however, Diggory caught dragonpox and died. Diggory tried his best during his years as minister to find a replacement for the Dementors that inhabited Azkaban, but due to his untimely death at the hands of dragonpox, this plan never came to fruition. And after Diggory, no minister for magic questioned the activities of Azkaban for 265 years, with minister after minister choosing to turn a blind eye to the inhumane conditions inside of the fortress. As awful as the fortress was, it was effective as a prison, and its existence meant that the terrifying Dementors inhabiting the island were accounted for. And so, for nearly 3 centuries, the only option for incarceration was to send people to what is effectively hell to get mercilessly tortured, an arrangement eerily similar to some sort of offering to a dark god. It wasn't until Kingsley Shacklebolt took over in 1998 that things were revisited, with Shacklebolt eventually purging the prison of Dementors. And that's it for this video. What do you think? Had you ever wondered why Azkaban is the only option for a wizarding prison? Until next time, remember, it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live.